Happy Nomad, Adventures and Musings from Year One on the Road by Brenda K. Uekert, Ph.D., read by Brenda Uekert. Introduction. About the only thing I was certain of was this. I was miserable. My career had suddenly ended and I struggled with my identity. Initially, I embraced my newfound freedom and my entrepreneurial spirit, but over time, working from the dining room table day after day lost its appeal. I felt stuck. After 18 months, I knew I couldn't continue down this path. I was horribly obese and depressed. If I let things proceed as they were, I was certain my health and well-being would only suffer. I had to make a change, a big change. I thought about my dreams and the things I used to enjoy. The same three values kept returning to the top of the list: traveling, spending time in nature, and meeting people. How can I design a new life with those elements as the centerpiece? I slowly opened the door of possibilities, and when I did, I concluded that I was sitting on an asset that no longer served my purposes. My house. What if I traded in the house to support a different kind of lifestyle, one of adventure and joy? RV living wasn't an obvious choice. After all, I had never even slept in an RV. I didn't know a thing about black tanks or driving a motorhome. Then I walked into a dealership and toured my first RV. I could do this. I could downsize, corral my 3 cats, and away we would go. And then, COVID-19. The house sat on the market, campgrounds closed, businesses shut down, but eventually the house sold and camping was back. On May 27th, 2020, I dropped the house keys on the kitchen counter, hitched up the Jeep, and said goodbye to my old life. When I left, the U.S. death toll related to COVID-19 topped 70,000 deaths. A year later, that number reached over 600,000 Americans. What a time to uproot one's life. It turns out there was no better time. Month 1. What the hell was I thinking? When I left my house on May 27, 2020, the panic and fear of COVID-19 was still very much on the rise. In my home state of Virginia, the governor allowed campgrounds to reopen on the condition that campers must stay for 14 days or more. This kept the weekend and recreational campers home while allowing full-time RVers to set up camp. And that's how I found my way to the Devil's Backbone Brewing Company campground in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Western Virginia, also known as the Brew Ridge Trail. I drove on I-64 heading west. Curious about a button on the steering column, I pressed it to discover that a light lit up on the dashboard, a light that read tow, T-O-W. Yes, this was more like it. I got a bit more confident as the first hour passed. But did I mention that I travel with 3 cats and this was their first trip? That was the scary part. It was just another day for the elder cat, Dolly, who sat on the sofa and came up to the cab to visit me. The little rascals, Coco and Ginger, scrambled to find a hiding place. They squirreled their way to a gap between the slide-outs and the ceiling and were not at all happy with me. Did I just traumatize the cats for life? Would they adjust? Would they like the really neat catio that allowed them to travel from the RV window into the tented area? Campground woes. Finally, I arrived at the campground thankful that each site was a pull-through. I could take my time on hitching and didn't have to back into a tight spot. I got hooked up and everything worked much to my relief, at least for a day or two. Then, as temperatures climbed, I learned the true meaning of 30 amps. That's how much voltage I can use in the RV, and when the air conditioner kicks in, one more strain to the system can trip the circuit. And that's what's happened. Air conditioner plus convection oven equals overload. And no big deal, right? Just find the circuit breaker and reset it. But where is the circuit breaker box? The young man who showed me around the RV never pointed it out. I got out the 500-page manual and still couldn't find it. So I walked to the campground host, who also had a Winnebago, and asked for help. It took us half an hour to find the circuit breaker box. When you're a newbie, there's no shame in asking for help. We've all been there at some time. I was back in business with a quick lesson on how to manage 30 amps. Worries and doubts. The highlight of my time in the Virginia mountains was a weekend visit by friends. We hiked in the mountains and shared some mask-covered laughs, and then they were gone and I was all alone. I listened to the rain fall on the roof, awoke to birdsong, and was comforted by my cats. On more than one occasion, I wondered if this was such a smart idea. Yes, I had to make a change and be ready to examine my entire life. But is this the way to do it? How will I manage this rig all by myself? Will the cats be okay? What if I can't kick these bad habits? And the biggie, what if I don't like this life? The big 5-mile trip. 2 weeks after my arrival at the campground, it was time to head south to Tennessee. But I only made it 5 miles down the road. That's when the check engine light came on, and I found a safe place to park along the roadside. As I sat and waited, hour after hour, I wondered if roadside assistance was an oxymoron. I was less than a mile from a major interstate, not far from a metropolitan area, and it still took over 5 hours for roadside assistance to arrive. I learned another valuable lesson. There's a device called a car code reader that will diagnose the reason for the check engine light. After plugging in the device, the technician said that a bump must have rattled a sensor. It was safe for me to continue. I changed my destination for the night, spending the night in a Bass Pro Shop parking lot just across the Tennessee line, at which time I found out that my generator wasn't actually producing any power in the cabin. Troubleshooting that issue would simply have to wait. Not only did I have a generator problem, but I had a cat problem, namely a Coco problem. When I pulled the bedroom slide in for travel, it left a large gap that led to the mechanics of the slide and the water pump. A gap plenty big for a cat, and that's where Coco scampered. I didn't know if the bottom was completely enclosed or if there were gaps that would allow her to escape outside. All I could do was wait for Coco to emerge and try to keep the other 2 cats from joining her. And without the AC, the RV was getting pretty warm. What a night. On to Tennessee. Coco finally joined us, and when I rolled out the next morning, I worked to secure the bedroom door so the cats couldn't get to the rear of the coach while I was driving. They would have to find better hiding places. My destination, Cedar Creek Corps of Engineer Campground in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. As I wound my RV on narrow, windy roads just out of town, I worried that my RV GPS might be confused. It looked like I was headed to a dead end, and the thought of unhitching the Jeep and trying to back up my 32-foot RV out of a dead-end situation crossed my mind more than once. But thank you, GPS, you did it! I made it into the campground, and after getting some assistance from a fellow RVer, I unhitched and backed myself into my campsite. I was under the trees, and a gorgeous blue lake was a short walk away. This is more like it. One of my reasons for selecting this campground was its proximity to my sister and her family. My Virgin campground outing made me realize I needed a few more essentials, so I was able to send some Amazon packages to my sister's address. More importantly, I was able to visit with family and relax for a few days. My stay was short, just 6 days. The highlight of my stay was introducing my niece to kayaking. Just weeks after leaving Virginia, I realized I was getting pretty competent with the RV life. True, I still had to figure out the generator issue, but my driving, hitching, and even backing the RV into a campsite had improved. As I hitched up my Jeep to head out, an older gentleman walked up to me and said, "You look like you know what you're doing. Can I ask you a question?" I just laughed, but yes, I was able to help him out. The jaunt north. I've no other words to describe the next few weeks other than a jaunt. The last 10 days of that first month are still a bit blurry. I left Tennessee and drove through the tangled web of freeways of Louisville, Kentucky, eventually crossing into Indiana. I camped at Charlestown State Park for 4 nights, spending most of that time in Louisville visiting a good friend. From Charlestown State Park, I drove west, heading into thunderstorms and crazy weather. I sat at a rest area waiting out the heaviest of the rain while monitoring my weather apps. Finally, the skies cleared, and I made my way to a farmhouse in the countryside. It was a harvest host site, farms, wineries, attractions that offer a parking space for an overnight stay. When I found the address, I was a bit worried. There was no way to turn a rig around, let alone park the thing. But the farmer came out to greet me, opened the gate to the pasture, and there I turned around and parked by an old shed. Now, one of the understandings of harvest host sites is that the RVer will make a purchase. So for $20, I got to help with chores. Not a perk for those of us who grew up milking cows. I contributed to their farm fund and advised them on the milking machine they had purchased to milk the goats. Spend money and get something that works. I joined them around the campfire in the evening for s'mores, and in the morning I was on my way. The next day brought me to the northwest corner of Illinois, Geneseo Campground. It was a privately owned campground that was next to a canal and a bike trail that I could ride for miles. Plus, I could cross the Mississippi into Iowa and check out the river towns. Despite the pandemic, I was able to dine outdoors and visit some small shops. What I remember the most about this campground was that they had live bluegrass music one evening. We sat in our lawn chairs, spaced out 6 feet apart, and tapped our feet. It would be months before I heard live music again. Progress. I wrapped up my first month of RVing in my 5th state, Illinois. Things were shaping up. With help from the Winnebago Aspect Facebook group, I figured out that I had to use a plug housed in the electric compartment to power the coach with the generator, and the rascal cats found their safe hiding place under the sofa. Dolly proved to be an ace traveler, winning over many admirers as I walked her on a leash. Things were definitely looking up. A look at the old me. I would be remiss if I neglected to share the horrible state of my physical and mental health when I climbed into the RV that very first day. Even though I knew I had to make a change and I was ready, I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared. In fact, when I remodeled the RV interior and replaced the dinette with a home office, I carved a quill and the message, "Be brave," into the desktop. That became my motto. I knew I had everything to gain and very little to lose. Even so, change is never easy, and I was on a mission to do so much more than change, to transform, to become the person I knew was hiding deep down inside. As difficult as it is for me to share this photo, it's important to see my starting point. I've struggled with my weight my entire life. When things were good, my body was fit. When things were bad, the weight piled on and my mood darkened. As I got older, it became more and more difficult to retrieve that fit body. How was I going to lose all this weight and get my real smile back? Would I really be able to find that strong, adventurous, determined woman underneath all this? I had my work cut out for me. Month 1 lessons. Cats can adapt. 30 amps goes fast. Get a car code reader. Ask for help. Trust your RV GPS. Join a Facebook group specific to your RV. Relax. RELAX. Relax.